They say her name was Amina, a woman born in chains, beaten, and left with nothing but her child. On the Whitfield plantation, pain was daily life, until the night she decided to fight fire with fire. While the masters slept inside their grand mansion, Amina lit the flames that would consume them all. Their screams carried across the night, and by dawn, the Whitfield family was nothing but ash. But vengeance is never simple. Her fire didn't end the nightmare. It spread it. Patrols, bloodhounds, and bounty men swarmed the land, hunting every slave they could find. And Amina, clutching her baby, was forced to choose: hide in the shadows or lead a war she never asked for. This is not just the story of a slave woman's revenge. It's the story of how one act of fire turned her into a legend feared by masters and remembered forever by the people she saved. Dawn crept across the tobacco fields like spilled milk, pale and thin. Amina's body ached as she pushed herself up from the dirt floor, every movement sending sharp pains through her back, where the overseer's whip had cut deep the day before. Samuel stirred against her chest, his tiny fists clutching at her worn dress. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, wrapping him securely to her back with a length of cloth. The familiar weight of him gave her strength, even as her wounds protested. The slave quarters slowly came alive around her. Others rose from their pallets, moving with the same bone-deep weariness. No one spoke much in these early hours. Words were dangerous things that could draw unwanted attention. They filed out into the misty morning, shoulders hunched, heads down. The dew-soaked grass soaked through Amina's bare feet as she walked toward the fields. The tobacco plants stretched endlessly before her, row after row disappearing into the morning haze. Samuel's warm breath against her neck kept time with her steps. From the big house, Clara Whitfield emerged onto the wide veranda, her silk dress rustling as she settled into her favorite chair. She always watched the morning field roll call, sipping her tea while her husband conducted his inspection. Her pale face was set in its usual expression of distaste, as if the very sight of them offended her. Elias Whitfield sat straight-backed on his horse, riding crop tapping against his boot as the overseer counted heads. The leather was worn smooth from use, not just on the horse. Amina kept her eyes down, but she could feel his gaze sliding over them all like oil. "You there!" he called out suddenly, pointing his crop at a young man 2 rows over. "Step forward." The man, barely more than a boy really, stumbled forward. His name was James, Amina remembered. He'd only arrived last month. "Sir?" James's voice quavered. "Your row was short yesterday by 30 plants," Whitfield said, his voice carrying across the morning stillness. "Care to explain why?" I was working as fast as I could, sir. The heat." The crop whistled through the air, catching James across the face. He fell to his knees, blood streaming from his split lip. "The heat affects everyone equally," Whitfield said calmly. "You'll make up the difference today, plus 20 more. Or you'll feel more than just the crop." Clara's laugh drifted down from the veranda, light and cruel as wind chimes. The day stretched on endlessly, sun beating down on their backs as they worked the rows. Amina's wounds had reopened. She could feel blood seeping into her dress, but she kept moving, kept working. Samuel had grown quiet in the heat, and she paused only long enough to give him sips of water from her gourd. Clara appeared periodically throughout the day, drifting between the rows with her parasol, inspecting their work with sharp eyes. She always seemed to find Amina, hovering nearby with that same look of contempt. "Make sure you check them all thoroughly tonight," Clara called to the overseer late in the afternoon. "Things have been going missing from the house lately." The sun was setting when they finally lined up for inspection. Amina's legs trembled with exhaustion as the overseer roughly patted them down one by one. When he reached her, His hands lingered longer than necessary, making her skin crawl. "What's this?" Clara's voice cut through the evening air like a knife. She stood in front of Amina, holding up a silver brooch that glinted in the fading light. "Where did you get this?" Amina's blood ran cold. "Ma'am, I've never seen that before." "Liar!" Clara's hand cracked across her face. "I saw you near my jewelry box this morning when you were cleaning." "Elias!" Whitfield appeared from the shadows of the house, his face hard in the twilight. "Take the child," he ordered the overseer. "No, please." Amina reached for Samuel, but rough hands tore him away. His cries pierced the gathering dark as two men forced her to her knees. 20 lashes, Whitfield said coldly. "Make them count." The whip fell again and again. Amina bit through her lip, trying not to scream, knowing it would only frighten Samuel more. Blood ran down her back, soaking into the dirt beneath her. When it was finally over, they left her there in the dirt. Samuel's cries had faded. Someone had taken him back to the quarters. Amina lay still, trying to gather the strength to move. Footsteps approached, Clara and Elias, walking back to the house. They paused nearby, speaking in low voices they clearly thought she couldn't hear. "The broker will be here next week," Clara was saying. "He's offering good prices for healthy children. That one should fetch enough to buy me a new dress for the harvest ball." "Are you sure?" Elias asked. "She's one of our better workers when she's not stealing." Clara's laugh was soft and poisonous. "She's becoming troublesome. Better to separate them now, before the boy gets too old. Besides, I've had my eye on that blue silk at the mercantile." Their voices faded as they walked away, leaving Amina alone in the growing darkness. She pressed her face into the dirt, feeling the earth drink her tears, her blood, her rage. Samuel, her sweet boy, her only light in this endless darkness. The night settled around her like a shroud. Crickets beginning their evening song. Stars appeared one by one overhead, cold and distant as Clara Whitfield's eyes. Somewhere in the quarters, she could hear the soft sound of women singing. A lament, a prayer, a promise. Amina lay still, gathering her strength, letting the night hide the terrible purpose growing in her heart. The stars had faded behind clouds by the time Amina found the strength to move. Her dress clung to her back, stiff with dried blood, but the pain had dulled to a throbbing rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She pushed herself up slowly, testing each muscle, each movement. The big house loomed dark and silent, its windows like hungry eyes watching her stumble toward the slave quarters. But she didn't go inside. Instead, she crept around to where Samuel lay sleeping in Martha's care. The older woman often watched the children while their mothers worked. "Thank you," Amina whispered, gathering her son gently. Martha's eyes were sad and knowing in the darkness, but she said nothing as Amina slipped away. "My sweet boy," Amina murmured against Samuel's soft curls. "They won't take you from me?" "I promise." He stirred slightly but didn't wake, trusting and warm against her chest. The carriage house stood separate from the main building, its wide doors secured with a simple iron latch. Amina knew it well. She'd cleaned the carriages countless times, polishing brass until Clara could see her reflection. Now she eased the door open just enough to slip inside. The smell of leather and horse hit her first, then the sharper scent of oil and wood polish. Moonlight filtered through the high windows, casting strange shadows among the carriages. Amina moved carefully, touching familiar shapes in the darkness. She found the oil rags first, tucked in their usual box beneath the workbench. The coarse cloth was heavy with months of polish and grease. She gathered them all, stuffing them into her apron. Next came the broken lantern glass. They never threw anything away that might be useful. The sharp edges caught the dim light as she wrapped the pieces in a scrap of cloth. In the corner, Fresh straw was piled high, waiting to be spread in the horse stalls. Amina pulled handfuls free, twisting them into tight bundles. The dry stalks crackled in her hands, eager to burn. "Hush now," she whispered as Samuel stirred again. "Just a little longer." She worked methodically, gathering her supplies with the same careful attention she'd given to all her tasks over the years. But this time, each item was chosen for its purpose in destruction. The night pressed close around her as she slipped back outside. The big house waited, pale and proud in the darkness. How many times had she scrubbed its floors, dusted its fine furniture, polished its silver? How many times had she endured Clara's sharp words and sharper slaps? How many others had suffered within those walls? Amina moved like a shadow along the edge of the house. She knew every entrance, every window. She'd cleaned them all. Now she went to each one in turn, wedging strips of wood into the frames so they couldn't be opened from inside. The front and back doors she secured with lengths of rope, knotted tight around the handles. At each corner of the house, she placed her bundles of straw, layered with oil-soaked rags. The broken glass she scattered beneath the windows, a cruel insurance against escape. All the while, Samuel slept against her chest, innocent of what was to come. The night had grown deeper, the kind of darkness that comes just before dawn. No sound came from within the house. The Whitfields slept peacefully in their fine beds, dreaming of profits and power, dreaming of selling her son. Amina's hands were steady as she drew out the flint she'd taken from the carriage house. The steel striker was cool against her palm. This was work she knew well. How many mornings had she lit the kitchen fire, the parlor hearth, the bedroom grates? How many times had she fed flames to warm the people who would destroy her family? "Your mama loves you," she whispered to Samuel, pressing her lips to his forehead. "Everything I do is for you." She shifted him more securely against her, making sure the cloth would hold him tight. The first spark caught the straw like a hungry thing, flames licking up the dry wood of the house. Amina moved quickly now, lighting each bundle in turn. The fire spread faster than she'd expected, racing along the oil-soaked rags, climbing the painted walls. A window shattered upstairs. Someone had woken. Amina melted back into the shadows as voices rose in alarm, first confused, then panicked. More windows broke as the flames reached them, hot glass raining down onto her carefully placed shards below. "Fire! Dear God! Fire!" Clara's voice, shrill with terror. Footsteps pounded inside, racing from room to room. The doors rattled as they discovered them bound shut. "Help! Someone help us!" Elias now, his commanding tone cracking with fear. Smoke billowed from every opening, thick and black against the star-filled sky. The screams began in earnest then. Amina stood motionless in the darkness, watching as orange light filled every window. She could see shadows moving inside, hands beating against glass, faces distorted by smoke and terror. The heat rolled out in waves, so intense it dried her tears before they could fall. Samuel woke at last, whimpering at the noise and heat. Amina held him close, humming softly as she had so many nights before. The sound mixed with the roar of flames, the cracking of timber, the desperate screams from within. The upper floor collapsed first, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. The screams had grown weaker now, muffled by smoke and falling debris. Amina waited until she was sure, until the only sound was the hungry crackling of flames. Then she turned and ran, her feet finding the path to the forest without thought. Samuel was quiet against her chest, perhaps soothed by the rhythm of her movement. Behind them, the fire reached into the sky like a beacon, turning night to false dawn. Amina didn't look back. She ran until the trees swallowed them, until the glow of the fire was just a faint orange smudge through the leaves. The forest closed around them, dark and deep, offering shelter to mother and child as they fled into the night. Dawn crept over the smoking ruins of the Whitfield mansion, pale sunlight filtering through the haze. The once proud house was now a blackened skeleton, its white columns toppled and charred. Wisps of smoke still curled from the debris, carrying the acrid smell of burnt wood and something worse. The first to arrive was Tom Peterson, owner of the neighboring plantation. His horse's hooves crunched over scattered glass and ash as he reined to a stop. Behind him, a wagon full of field hands jolted to a halt, their faces tight with fear. "Good Lord above," Peterson breathed, staring at the destruction. The stone foundation was cracked from the heat, and parts of the walls still glowed dully red. Nothing moved in the ruins except tendrils of smoke. More wagons arrived as word spread. Plantation owners, overseers, and workers gathered in shocked clusters. The slave quarters stood untouched, but empty. The residents had fled in the night, fearing blame. Marcus Webb, the Whitfield's head overseer, emerged from the carriage house where he'd been sleeping off a drunk. His face was ashen as he surveyed the scene. "I heard nothing," he said hoarsely. "The fire was too far gone when I woke." "What happened here, Webb?" Peterson demanded. "Where are the Whitfields? Where are your people?" Webb's bloodshot eyes darted around the crowd. "Escaped slaves," he said suddenly, his voice growing stronger. "Must have been that group that's been causing trouble up north. Seen their tracks heading into the woods. At least 10 of them, maybe more." The gathered owners muttered darkly. There had been rumors of organized bands of fugitives raiding plantations, but nothing this bold, this devastating. "Look here!" called one of Peterson's men, pointing to footprints in a patch of mud. "Multiple sets, heading toward the tree line." Webb jumped on the evidence. "See? They came in the night, set the fire. Probably hoped to cause panic, help more slaves escape in the confusion." He conveniently didn't mention his own drunken negligence. The story spread quickly among the growing crowd. It was easier to believe in marauding fugitives than to consider alternatives. The owners gathered in tight circles, faces grim as they discussed responses. "We'll need to organize patrols," Peterson declared. "Sweep the woods, check all the known hiding spots. Can't let them think they can get away with this." Workers began picking through the ruins, looking for remains. The heat had done its work well. Only fragments of bone remained, blackened and crumbling. They were gathered carefully, placed in a wooden box for later burial. "The whole family," someone whispered. "Even the children." The morning grew warmer as the sun climbed higher. More people arrived. Law officers, neighbors from miles around, all drawn by the smoke and rumors. The story of murderous fugitives grew with each telling. Deep in the woods, Amina huddled in a hollow between massive tree roots. Samuel nursed quietly, one tiny hand curled against her skin. She had run until exhaustion forced her to stop, then found this shelter as dawn approached. The forest was alive with normal sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, small animals scurrying through undergrowth. Nothing suggested pursuit. Still, Amina stayed hidden, keeping Samuel close and quiet. She had taken nothing with her except the clothes they wore. Her dress was stiff with dried blood and soot, but she couldn't risk moving to find water yet. Samuel seemed content enough, warm and fed. For the first time since she'd struck the spark, Amina allowed herself to think about what she'd done. The screams echoed in her memory, but she felt no regret. They would have sold her son, torn him from her arms. The fire had been justice, plain and simple. The sun was high when she heard voices approaching. Amina pressed deeper into her hiding place, covering Samuel with a fold of her dress. A patrol passed nearby, She recognized Peterson's overseer and several others. "Check every hollow tree, every thicket," one man was saying. "There's a bonus for anyone who finds tracks." "What about the field hands?" another asked. "Most of them ran off when they saw the fire." "Round them up. Every last one." Someone must have helped those fugitives, probably gave them information about the house, when people would be sleeping. The voices grew fainter as they moved away. Amina held her breath until she could no longer hear their footsteps. "The entire slave community will answer for this," came a new voice, closer. Amina recognized Jackson, the patrol leader known for his cruelty. "If they won't tell us what they know, we'll beat it out of them. No one sleeps until we have answers." "What about the ones who ran?" someone asked. "Hunt them down. Every runaway will be made an example of. The Whitfields had friends in high places. They'll want blood for this." Their voices faded into the forest. Amina stayed frozen in her hiding place, Samuel warm and heavy against her chest. The momentary feeling of triumph, of freedom, withered in her heart. She had struck her blow for justice, but others would pay the price. The woods grew quiet again, except for natural sounds. Somewhere in the distance, hunting dogs bayed, but they were far away, searching the wrong trails. Amina had been careful to wade through streams, doubling back and crossing her trail. Samuel stirred, making small, hungry sounds. Amina adjusted him to nurse again, her mind racing. She had thought the fire would be an end, a clean break, a path to freedom. Instead, it had started something much bigger, something she couldn't control. The sun filtered through the leaves above, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. Amina watched them move, keeping absolutely still as another patrol passed in the distance. Their voices carried clearly through the trees. "Spread out! Check every possible hiding place. We'll find who did this, and they'll wish they'd burned with the others." The afternoon sun hung low when a fine carriage rattled up the muddy road to the Whitfield plantation. 4 matched bay horses pulled the elegant vehicle, their coats dark with sweat from the hard journey. Dust coated the black lacquered sides, evidence of many miles traveled in haste. The carriage bore the Whitfield family crest, a reminder that the plantation's influence extended far beyond these fields. Inside sat Proctor Whitfield and his older brother Silas, cousins to the deceased Elias. They had driven their horses mercilessly from Charleston upon receiving word of the fire. The carriage stopped before the ruins. Proctor was first to emerge, his boots hitting the ground with military precision. He was tall and lean, with hard eyes that took in the destruction. His riding coat was fine leather, and a pistol hung openly at his hip. "Savages!" he spat, surveying the blackened walls. "Every last one of them." Silas stepped down more carefully, adjusting his spectacles. Where his brother radiated fury, he projected cold calculation. "The house can be rebuilt," he said. "The family name is what matters now." The gathered overseers and neighboring planters drew back slightly. The Whitfield cousins' reputation preceded them. Proctor for his quick temper and quicker trigger finger, Silas for his ruthless business dealings. "Who's in charge here?" Proctor demanded. Marcus Webb hurried forward, hat in hand. "I am, sir, or was, under your cousin Elias." "Marcus Webb, head overseer." "Tell me everything," Proctor ordered. "Leave nothing out." Webb recounted the official story: the attack by fugitive slaves, the fire, the missing field hands. With each detail, Proctor's face grew darker. His hand kept straying to his pistol. "And no one saw anything?" Silas asked quietly. "No warning? No signs beforehand?" "Nothing, sir," Webb insisted. "It was all peaceful, normal." "Then the fire." "Peaceful?" Proctor cut in. "With half your slaves fled into the woods? That doesn't sound peaceful to me." Webb shifted uncomfortably. They ran when they saw the fire, sir. Feared they'd be blamed. As they should be, Proctor snapped. Conspiracy and silence are just as guilty as the torch that lit the flame. Silas raised a calming hand. The important thing now is finding those responsible. The Whitfield name must be avenged. Properly, legally, but absolutely. He turned to address the gathered crowd. 20 pieces of gold to anyone who brings us information leading to the capture of those responsible. 50 pieces for actual captives, alive, so they can face proper justice. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was a fortune in reward money, enough to tempt even honest men. I want bloodhounds, Proctor added. The best tracking dogs in the county. Money is no object. Already sent for them, sir, Webb said eagerly. Should arrive by nightfall. Good. Proctor paced the edge of the ruins. Post riders to every plantation within 50 miles. I want patrols coordinating, checking every possible hiding place. No one rests until we have answers. Silas was already writing orders, his pen scratching quickly across paper. We'll need to reassert control quickly. Make examples of any captured runaways. Show that the system remains strong despite this incident. The gathered men nodded in agreement. This was language they understood. Swift, brutal reassertion of authority. Double the usual lash count for any offense, Proctor ordered. Triple it for any hint of defiance. I want every slave in the county to think twice before even breathing wrong. More carriages arrived as afternoon faded toward evening. Other Whitfield relations, drawn by the tragedy. Each new arrival added to the tension, the calls for retribution. The first baying of hounds echoed across the plantation just as the sun touched the horizon. 3 pairs of bloodhounds strained at their leashes, eager to begin the hunt. Their handlers, professionals who specialized in tracking runaways, conferred with Webb about likely escape routes. Deep in the swamps, Amina heard the distant howls. She had pushed further in as the day progressed, following game trails through increasingly wet terrain. Her dress was soaked and muddy to the knees, but she kept moving. Samuel was remarkably quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. He dozed against her chest, warm despite the damp. Amina had found a few safe spots to rest and feed him, always listening for pursuit. The swamp grew darker as night approached. Strange birds called from tangled branches, and things moved in the murky water. Amina picked her way carefully, testing each step before putting her weight down. She crossed another stream, deliberately splashing to leave false trails. The water was cold, but she forced herself to wade deeper, holding Samuel high. Better to be wet and cold than caught. The hounds bayed again, closer now. They would follow her scent to the stream, but the water would confuse them. Still, she couldn't rest yet. Amina pushed through a curtain of Spanish moss, branches catching at her hair. The ground grew softer, threatening to pull her feet under with each step. But she had heard stories of safe camps deep in the swamps, places where runaways gathered and survived. Somewhere behind her, a man shouted, too distant to make out words, but the tone carried anger and determination. The hounds answered with excited howls. Samuel stirred against her chest, making a small sound of discomfort. Amina adjusted him gently, whispering comfort. Hush now, little one. We have to be quiet as shadows. The swamp grew darker still as thick clouds covered the rising moon. Amina pushed forward, using her feet to feel the path. Each step was a battle against mud and exhaustion. She had thought the fire would end it. One terrible act of justice, then freedom. Instead, she had sparked something larger, something that threatened to consume more than just the Whitfield mansion. The baying of the hounds echoed again, spreading out as the teams split up to cover more ground. Amina forced herself to keep moving, one careful step at a time, deeper into the darkening swamp. Through the darkness, Amina nearly walked into the first warning sign. 3 broken arrows stuck in a cypress tree, pointing different directions to confuse strangers. But she recognized the pattern from whispered stories. Follow the center arrow's direction when the moon is rising. The ground became firmer as she picked her way forward. The cypress trees grew closer together, their knees creating natural barriers. Anyone charging through would make noise and get tangled, but someone moving carefully could slip between. A soft whistle, like a night bird, froze her in place. Another answered from a different direction. Amina held perfectly still, Samuel quiet against her chest. "Don't move." The voice was low, nearly lost in the swamp sounds. A shadow detached itself from behind a tree, a tall man holding a crude spear. "How'd you find this place?" "I followed the arrows," Amina said softly. "I heard stories, in the quarters, about safe places in the swamps." More figures emerged from the darkness surrounding her. They carried weapons, spears, clubs, a few rusted knives. Their clothes were patched but sturdy, adapted for swamp life. "She's got a baby," one whispered. "Marcus Webb's dogs are out tonight. Heard them earlier." The tall man with the spear stepped closer. The moonlight caught his face. Dark skin weathered by years outdoors, eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Jonas. This is my camp. And you just led those dogs straight to us." "I crossed 3 streams," Amina said. "Doubled back twice. They'll lose the scent." "Maybe. Maybe not." Jonas gestured, and the others lowered their weapons, but remained wary. "You're the one they're hunting hardest, aren't you? The one who burned the Whitfield place." Amina met his gaze steadily. "Yes." Mutters ran through the group. Some sounded admiring, others worried. Jonas just studied her, his expression unreadable. "Bold move," he said finally. "Stupid, but bold. Now every plantation owner for 50 miles is out for blood. Patrols are everywhere. You made life harder for every runaway in the county." "They were going to sell my son," Amina said quietly. Samuel stirred against her, and she adjusted her grip. "I heard them planning it." Laughing about it. "So you burned them alive?" Jonas wasn't asking. "And now their kin are offering gold for your capture. 50 pieces. Enough to tempt even friends to turn betrayer." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We've built something here. A safe place. Supply lines. Networks to help others escape. Your fire put it all at risk." "I didn't know about your camp," Amina said. "I didn't plan to bring trouble to anyone else. But I won't apologize for what I did." One of the other rebels spoke up, an older woman with gray-streaked hair. "The baby's crying, Jonas. At least let her rest. Feed him proper. We can decide things after." Jonas considered, then nodded shortly. "Take her to the cooking fire. Keep watch. I need to talk to the others." The woman led Amina through the trees. The camp revealed itself gradually. Platforms built in the cypresses, connected by rope bridges. Small shelters of wood and canvas, carefully waterproofed. A fire pit dug into a rise of dry ground, the smoke dispersed by the tree canopy. "I'm Martha," the woman said, helping Amina settle by the fire. "Let's get that little one comfortable." Samuel was indeed fussing now. Amina loosened her dress to feed him while Martha brought a cup of thin soup. The warm food helped ease some of her exhaustion. She could hear Jonas and the others arguing in low voices nearby. The words dangerous and risk came up often, but so did inspiration and fighting back. More rebels emerged from the shelters as word spread of her arrival. They gathered in small groups, watching and whispering. Amina recognized the look in their eyes, the same burning she'd felt when she struck the spark that burned the mansion. A young man approached, limping slightly. "Is it true?" Did you really lock the doors before you set it alight? Hush, Martha scolded. Let her rest. There'll be time for stories later. But others drew closer, asking questions in hushed voices. How had she planned it? Where did she get the oil? Did she hear them screaming? Jonas returned, dispersing the crowd with sharp gestures. He squatted next to Amina, watching Samuel nurse. The others want you to stay, he said finally. They think you're some kind of hero, that your fire is a sign it's time to fight back harder. And what do you think? Amina asked. I think you're desperate, dangerous, and probably doomed. He smiled slightly, without humor. But I also think turning you away would cause more problems than keeping you. So you can stay. For now. He stood, addressing the gathered rebels. Double the watches tonight. Check all the warning signs. If those dogs get too close, we move camp deeper in. The crowd dispersed, going about their tasks with practiced efficiency. Martha brought Amina a blanket, showing her where she could sleep safely elevated from the damp ground. Samuel finished nursing and drifted off, his small face peaceful in the firelight. Amina stroked his cheek, marveling at how quiet he'd been through their flight. Around her, the camp settled into night routines, but she could still hear the whispers, see the sideways glances. Her story was already spreading, growing with each telling. The woman who burned the master's house, the slave who struck back, the mother who chose fire over losing her child. Jonas passed by on his rounds, pausing to study her again. Get some rest, he said gruffly. Tomorrow, we'll see what kind of trouble you really are. Amina nodded, settling back against a cypress trunk. Samuel's warm weight against her chest anchored her as exhaustion crept in. The fire crackled softly, and somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called. She was still hunted, still in danger. But for now, at least, she had found a kind of sanctuary. She closed her eyes, letting the swamp sounds wash over her, and slept. Over the next few days, Amina learned the rhythms of the Maroon camp. Jonas ran it with strict discipline. Watches changed every 4 hours, supplies were carefully rationed, and everyone had assigned duties. Even with Samuel strapped to her back, she took her share of the work. Keep low, Jonas whispered one moonless night. They crouched in thick undergrowth near the road, watching a patrol pass. Wait for my signal. Amina's hands tightened on the crude knife they'd given her. Beside her, 3 other rebels held rope and sacks. Their target was the supply wagon that followed most patrols, carrying food and ammunition. The horses' hooves faded into distance. Jonas raised his hand, then dropped it. They moved. Working quickly, they scattered caltrops across the road, crude metal spikes that would lame horses. Further ahead, others were laying false tracks, leading away from the camp. The patrol would waste hours following them. Movement, Martha hissed from her lookout position. They melted back into the brush just as riders approached from the opposite direction. These weren't regular patrol. They were bounty hunters, rough men with dogs and guns. Amina recognized the lead rider's voice from her days hiding in the woods. Her pulse quickened. The dogs caught their scent. Baying filled the night as the hunters wheeled their horses around. "Scatter!" Jonas ordered sharply. "Meet at the hollow tree!" Amina ran, keeping low between the trees. Behind her, she heard shouts and the crack of pistol fire. Samuel, miracle child, stayed quiet against her back. A shape lunged from behind a trunk. One of the hunters had dismounted to follow on foot. His hand caught her dress, and they went down together, rolling in the leaves. He was stronger, but Amina had survived the Whitfields through cunning. As he tried to pin her, she went limp, then drove her knee up hard. When he doubled over, she slashed with her knife. Hot blood sprayed across her face. The hunter made a wet, choking sound and collapsed. Amina scrambled up, heart pounding. Her first kill since the fire. More shots rang out, but they seemed further away now. She ran again, counting turns until she reached the hollow cypress they used as a rally point. Others were already there, breathing hard. "Everyone make it?" Jonas appeared last, moving like a shadow. "Martha?" "Here," Martha wheezed. "Lost them in the creek." "Good. Back to camp. Different routes." "Move!" They separated again, using paths they'd carefully prepared. Fallen logs across streams, hidden rope bridges between trees. By the time they regained the camp's platforms, the dogs' baying had faded to nothing. "You held steady," Jonas told Amina later, as she cleaned her knife. "Most freeze their first time, up close like that." "Not my first time," she said quietly. The fire cast strange shadows across her face. "Just my first with a knife instead of flame." Word of the skirmish spread through the camp. That night, more rebels than usual gathered around the main fire, watching Amina with new interest. Samuel slept peacefully in a sling while she ate her portion of stew. "Tell us about the mansion," someone called. "About the night you burned it." Amina looked up, meeting eager faces. Even those who had been wary of her leaned closer to listen. "It was beautiful," she said softly. "All white columns and fancy windows. They were so proud of it. Made us scrub every inch, polish every rail. Wouldn't let us sleep until it gleamed." She stirred the fire, sending sparks spinning up into the darkness. "I knew every room, every door. Knew which windows they left unlatched in summer heat. Knew where they kept the lamp oil." The circle was silent now, hanging on her words. Even the night birds seemed to pause. "They beat me that day. For a brooch I never touched. Left me bleeding in the dirt. But that wasn't why I did it." She touched Samuel's sleeping face. "I heard them planning to sell him. Heard Clara laugh about it. Said he'd bring a good price, being so young." Murmurs of anger rippled through the listeners. Many had lost children to the trade. "I waited until deep night. Soaked rags in oil, stuffed them under doors and windows, made sure every exit was blocked." Her voice stayed steady, remembered flame reflecting in her eyes. The spark caught fast. Dry wood, summer heat. It went up like God's judgment. Someone gasped softly. Martha crossed herself. "Elias woke first. I heard him shouting, trying to break down the door I'd barred." Clara screamed for help from their fine bedroom window. Amina's lips curved slightly. But help was too far away, and I made sure that fire burned hot. The circle was absolutely still. Many looked afraid, but others nodded slowly, understanding in their faces. "They say vengeance is the Lord's," Amina finished quietly. "But sometimes the Lord works through mortal hands, through fire and blade." Silence held for a long moment. Then someone began humming softly, an old spiritual about deliverance. Others joined in, voices barely above whispers. Jonas stood apart, leaning against a tree. His expression was complex, distrust warring with something like respect as he watched Amina cradle her son. She met his gaze steadily. They both knew her story would spread beyond the camp now, growing with each telling. She was no longer just another fugitive. She was becoming something more, a symbol, a spark. The hymn faded. People began drifting away to their sleeping platforms, still whispering. Martha squeezed Amina's shoulder as she passed. Jonas remained, studying her through the dying fire's glow. Neither spoke. They both understood that something had shifted tonight, though neither could say exactly what. The flames burned lower, and somewhere in the swamp a night bird called. A week after her story spread through the camp, Amina traced a rough map in the dirt with a stick. 5 rebels crouched around her, studying the lines she drew. "The Ledger House stands here," she said, marking an X. Small building, separate from the ruins. They keep the books there. Records of debts, ownership papers, sale contracts. Jonas frowned. Dangerous. Close to where the patrols camp. But worth it? Martha whispered. Those papers chain hundreds to the land. Destroy them. And chains break, Amina finished. She drew more lines, showing paths through the swamp. We go tonight. New moon, storm coming. Perfect cover. They spent hours planning. Amina knew every inch of the estate from her years there. She described guard rotations, dog patterns, the best shadows to use for cover. As dusk approached, she wrapped Samuel tightly against her chest. Some wanted her to leave him behind, but she refused. He stays with me, she said firmly. Always. Thunder rolled in the distance as they moved out. 6 shadows slipping through cypress trees, stepping carefully on platforms of fallen logs to avoid leaving tracks. The coming storm had driven most patrols to shelter, leaving gaps in the watch. Rain began falling as they reached the edge of cleared land. The Whitfield mansion's blackened skeleton loomed ahead, still reeking of smoke after all these weeks. Amina felt no fear looking at it now, only cold satisfaction. There, she whispered, pointing to a small outbuilding. Records inside, 2 guards usually. Lightning flashed, showing the guards huddled under an overhang, more concerned with staying dry than watching shadows. Jonas nodded to 2 rebels, who circled wide around the building. They waited, rain soaking through their clothes. Samuel stayed perfectly quiet, as if understanding the need for silence. A bird call sounded, the signal. The 2 rebels had reached position. Now, Amina breathed. They moved fast through curtains of rain. The guards never saw them coming. Quick, brutal efficiency. No shots fired, just the whisper of knives. Jonas and Martha dragged the bodies into shadows, while Amina tried the door. Locked, she muttered. Here. One of the rebels handed her a pry bar. It took precious minutes to work the lock free, every sound seeming thunderous despite the storm. Finally, the door creaked open. They slipped inside, water pooling around their feet. Lightning illuminated shelves of ledgers and papers, carefully organized and labeled. Start with the sale records, Amina ordered. Then debt papers. Anything with names or prices. She shifted Samuel to one arm, grabbed a ledger with the other. They worked quickly, piling documents in the center of the room. Martha found dried tobacco leaves used for bookmarking. Perfect tinder. Jonas discovered a half-full bottle of whiskey in a desk drawer. More lightning flashed outside. Through the window, Amina glimpsed movement, a patrol passing in the distance, barely visible through the rain. They needed to hurry. She pulled a small tin from her pocket, the fire-starting kit she'd carried since that first night of vengeance. Her hands shook slightly as she struck the flint, remembering another storm, another fire. The spark caught. Tobacco leaves smoldered, then blazed. They fed ledgers into the growing flames, watching ink and paper curl and blacken. Names turning to ash, Martha whispered, like spirits being freed. Amina thought of all the lives recorded in these pages. Children sold away from parents, families split apart by debt and greed. The fire grew hotter, hungry for more fuel. They added the whiskey, making flames leap higher. Samuel squirmed against her chest, disturbed by the heat. She soothed him with gentle touches, humming softly under her breath. The same lullaby she'd sung the night she burned the mansion. Time to go, Jonas warned. Smoke was starting to billow out the windows, drawing attention even through the rain. They slipped out the way they'd come, leaving the fire to feast. Already shouts were rising from the patrol camp. Too late to save the records, but soon they'd have dogs on their trail. The rebels scattered into the swamp, using different routes back to camp. Amina led 2 others along a hidden path she'd discovered, winding between cypress knees and over submerged logs. Behind them, orange light pulsed against low clouds, turning rain to falling gold. The Ledger House was fully engulfed now, years of ownership and debt becoming smoke and ember. They ran through the downpour, splashing through shallow water and clinging mud. Samuel, wonder child, stayed silent through it all. Amina's heart pounded with more than exertion. Fierce joy burned in her chest, familiar as flame. The camp welcomed them back with quiet celebration. As rebels returned in ones and twos, word spread of their success. Someone passed around a jug of corn whiskey. Voices rose in whispered song. 300 souls, Martha announced, counting on fingers. At least that many had papers in those books, all free now, far as records show. More than that, Jonas added. Debt papers, too. Half the white farmers around here owed money to the Whitfields. Those debts are smoke now. Amina sat apart from the celebration, nursing Samuel and watching firelight play on faces. She saw hope there, and something stronger. Belief. The same look she'd seen when she told the story of burning the mansion. News would spread, plantation to plantation, quarter to quarter, through the secret networks of whispers and rumors that slaves maintained. Word of another fire, another blow against the masters. More than that, word of who had led the raid, the woman who wielded flame like a weapon, who turned the master's papers and property into ash, who had burned the great house and lived to burn again. Rain continued falling outside their sheltered platforms, but inside the camp, spirits soared. Something had shifted tonight. They all felt it. This was more than escape, more than survival. This was the beginning of something new. Another kind of fire was spreading now, one that couldn't be quenched by rain or stamped out by patrols. It leapt from heart to heart, farm to farm, carried on whispered words and secret smiles. Amina held her son close, watching the future unfold in flickering shadows. The raiders had destroyed more than papers tonight. They'd broken chains forged of ink and law, sending hundreds of captive souls floating free as smoke on the wind. The swamp had changed with the seasons. Cypress leaves turned golden, painting the water with fallen color. Where fear once ruled, now hope grew like the wild mushrooms dotting fallen logs. Amina sat on a raised platform, watching children play below. Samuel toddled after older kids, his giggles mixing with bird calls and splashing feet. He was growing fast, already steady on his legs. The sight filled her with fierce pride. "Look at them all," Martha said, settling beside her. "Camp's twice the size it was when you came." It was true. New faces arrived weekly. Field hands, house servants, even a few skilled craftsmen who'd heard whispered tales of the woman who burned the master's house. They brought news, supplies, and, most importantly, more hands for the fight. "The stories spread further than we thought," Amina said. "Did you hear about the Wilkinson place? Their slaves walked off in broad daylight, every last one. Overseer couldn't stop them." Martha grinned. "Heard they sang while they walked. Something about fire coming for the wicked." Below, Samuel squealed as another child splashed water at him. He was part of a proper community now, not just surviving but living. Other mothers watched out for him, taught him things Amina never could alone. "We're building something real here," Martha continued. "Not just hiding, planning, growing." Amina nodded. The camp had evolved from a mere refuge into an organized resistance. They had lookouts, supply lines, coded signals. Raids were coordinated, targets chosen carefully. She'd helped create systems that would last. "Jonas still thinks we're too bold," she said quietly. "Says we're drawing too much attention. Jonas needs to open his eyes. Can't stay invisible forever. Sometimes You have to strike to stay free. They watched the children play while discussing the next raid. Another plantation's storehouse needed clearing out. Food for the coming winter. Amina had already scouted the routes, noted guard patterns. Evening brought the whole camp together for meals. Nearly 50 people now, gathered on connected platforms rising from the swamp. Cooking fires cast warm light on faces that had grown strong and proud. Samuel sat in Amina's lap, stuffing cornbread into his mouth. She wiped crumbs from his chin, heart swelling at his healthy appetite. No more half portions or missed meals. Here, everyone shared equally. "Mama," he said clearly. A new word he'd learned just days ago. Each time he said it, joy pierced her chest like sunlight through leaves. Across the fire, she caught Jonas watching them, his expression troubled. He'd grown more withdrawn lately, speaking less in planning meetings. When he did speak, it was always to urge caution, to warn against taking risks. Later, as people settled for sleep, Amina noticed him moving between platforms, speaking quietly to trusted allies. She thought nothing of it then. He often checked security arrangements at night. She lay down with Samuel on their pallet, his small body curled trustingly against her side. The night air was cool, carrying the first hints of autumn. Frogs sang their endless chorus. All seemed peaceful. "Sleep well, little man," she whispered, stroking Samuel's curls. He was already breathing deeply, one hand clutching her shirt. Dawn broke gray and misty. Amina woke to wrongness, a silence where there should be morning birds. Then shouts erupted, followed by gunshots. She snatched Samuel up, fully awake now. Figures were climbing onto the platforms, white men with dogs and guns. Somehow they'd found the hidden paths, gotten past the lookouts. "Run!" she screamed, seeing others already fleeing. She wrapped Samuel in a blanket, heading for their escape route. But bounty hunters seemed to appear from every direction. Martha appeared beside her, swinging a heavy stick. "This way!" They ran together, jumping between platforms. Behind them, chaos erupted. Screams, shots, splashing bodies. A dog lunged, nearly catching Amina's leg. Martha smashed its skull with her stick. They reached the edge of the camp, where a narrow log bridge led to solid ground. Samuel began crying as shots cracked past them. Amina stumbled, recovering quickly. Just a little further to the dense brush where they could lose pursuers. A rope snapped around her ankles, yanking her down. Samuel flew from her arms as she fell. Martha caught him, hesitating. "Go!" Amina shouted. "Take him! Run!" More ropes descended. Rough hands grabbed her arms. She fought like a wild thing, biting, kicking, screaming. Through tears, she saw Martha disappearing into the swamp with Samuel. "Got the ringleader!" someone shouted. A fist struck her head, dazing her. They dragged her up, binding her wrists. Through blurred vision, she saw other captives being taken. And there, watching from the trees, Jonas. Their eyes met. His face showed pain, but also grim resolution. "Traitor!" she screamed. "Judas!" The bounty hunters laughed, one striking her again. As consciousness faded, she heard Samuel's cries growing distant. Her last thought was a prayer, that Martha would keep him safe, raise him strong. Then darkness took her, and the swamp's morning chorus resumed its song, indifferent to human suffering. Cold iron bit into Amina's wrists and ankles as she knelt in the gray ashes of the Whitfield mansion. The chains were short, forcing her to stay low, head bowed like in prayer. But she wasn't praying. She was remembering the flames. Right here, where her knees pressed into cold cinders, the grand staircase had once stood. She could still hear Clara Whitfield's screams as the fire trapped her upstairs. Now weeds grew through the scorched floorboards, and morning dew dampened the ash into a gritty paste. "Look at me, slave," Proctor Whitfield commanded. He was the youngest of the cousins, barely 20 but already cruel. His boots appeared in her vision, polished leather now dusted with ash. Amina kept her eyes down, counting her breaths like Martha had taught her during the hard times. In, out, steady. The pain would pass. A hand grabbed her jaw, fingers digging in. Proctor forced her face up, his pale eyes burning with hate. "You really thought you'd get away with it? Burning good Christian folk in their beds?" She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. Behind him, the older cousin Silas watched from horseback, a proper Southern gentleman in his tailored coat. His quiet contempt was somehow worse than Proctor's rage. "The Lord demands justice," Silas drawled, "and we aim to give it to him. In front of the whole county, so everyone remembers what happens to murderers." Proctor released her face with a shove. "3 days. We'll build the gallows right here in the ashes." Poetic, don't you think? Amina's throat was dry, tongue thick with ash taste. She thought of Samuel, praying Martha had gotten him deep into the swamps. The pain of separation clawed at her chest, worse than any whip. "Nothing to say?" Proctor circled her like a hungry dog. "You had plenty to say when you were playing Rebel Queen in the swamps. All those raids, all that theft and destruction. The property ledgers," Silas added softly. "That was clever. Can't prove ownership without papers. Had to petition the courts for months to restore legal claims." A boot struck Amina's ribs, sending her sprawling in the ashes. She couldn't catch herself with the chains, could only lie there struggling to breathe as Proctor kicked her again. "Enough," Silas said. "We need her healthy enough to hang properly. No point in a public execution if she's already half dead." Proctor spat on her but stepped back. "Fine. Let her rot in the cellar till Sunday. Maybe she'll find God before the devil takes her." 2 overseers dragged Amina up, uncaring of how the chains cut her skin. The cellar had survived the fire, its stone walls black with soot, but still strong. They threw her down the stairs into darkness. The heavy door clanged shut above, leaving only thin strips of light through iron grates. Amina lay where she'd fallen, letting the cool earth soothe her new bruises. The chains clinked as she slowly sat up. This cellar held memories, too. As a child, she'd helped the cook store preserves here, arranging jars on wooden shelves. Later, she'd hidden from punishments in dark corners, praying not to be found. Now the shelves were ash, the corners full of debris. Hours crept by, marked only by the shifting light through the grates. Occasionally boots appeared above, accompanied by cruel laughter or threats. Amina ignored them, retreating into memories of Samuel's smile, his small hands reaching for her face. "Stay strong, my son," she whispered into the darkness. "Grow tall and free. Remember your mama loved you fierce as fire." A rat skittered past, bold in the dim light. Amina watched it nose through the ashes, seeking crumbs. Even here, life found a way to survive. The thought sparked something in her chest. Not hope exactly, but determination. She examined her chains in the weak light, testing each link. They were solid iron, well forged, but the manacles had slight give where they met the chains. If she dislocated her thumbs? Maybe? No. Even if she slipped the cuffs, the cellar door was barred. Armed men patrolled above. She had no weapons, no allies near. This wasn't like the swamp where she knew every tree and shadow. Still, the thought of dying meekly, being made an example of, it burned worse than the manacles. She was Amina, who had burned the masters in their beds, who had led raids and freed dozens, who had given her people a taste of real freedom. "I won't give them the satisfaction," she whispered, voice harsh in the silence. "If I die, I'll die fighting. Make them work for it. She thought of the stories that would spread after. How the slave woman who burned the mansion fought to her last breath. How she refused to break, to beg, to show fear. Let that be her legacy to Samuel, to all the children in the swamp. The chains rattled as she shifted, trying to find a position that hurt less. Her ribs throbbed where Proctor had kicked them. But pain was an old friend now, familiar as breathing. She could use it, let it feed the fire inside. "Samuel?" She whispered his name like a prayer. "My brave boy, my heart." Tears finally came, silent in the darkness. Not tears of fear or despair, but of fierce love and pride. Her son would live free, would grow strong among people who saw him as human. The light was fading now, evening settling over the ruins above. Soon it would be full dark, with only stars through the grates. Amina straightened her spine, ignoring the chain's bite. She began planning, calculating angles and timing, how to make her final moments count. They wanted a spectacle? She would give them one. Her body would become a weapon, her death a reminder that slaves were not cattle to be culled. Even in chains, she had that power. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Whitfield plantation ruins. Dew sparkled on the gallows that now stood where the grand staircase had once been. The rough wood looked alien among the scorched remains, like some twisted tree that had grown overnight from the ashes. Wagons and carriages lined the muddy road, bringing crowds from 3 counties to witness justice. Ladies in their Sunday best held parasols against the weak sun, while men in work clothes passed whiskey flasks and traded dark jokes. Children darted between the adults' legs, playing until sharp voices called them back. In the cellar, Amina heard the growing noise above. Boots on boards, wheels on gravel, the murmur of dozens of voices. The sound pressed down on her like a physical weight. 3 days of darkness and chains had left her weak, but the fire inside still burned. Her split lip had scabbed over, and dried blood stiffened her shirt where Proctor's kicks had broken skin. The cellar door creaked open, flooding the space with harsh light. 2 overseers clattered down the stairs, keys jangling. "Time for your dancing lesson, girl," one sneered, unlocking her chains from the wall ring. They hauled her up roughly, not caring when she stumbled on stiff legs. Sunlight stabbed her eyes as they dragged her into the open. The crowd's chatter died, replaced by whispers and sharp intakes of breath. Amina forced her spine straight, despite the chain's weight. Let them see she wasn't broken. The cousins waited by the gallows, Silas in a fine black coat and Proctor fidgeting with his cravat. Behind them stood the county sheriff and a preacher clutching a worn Bible. Armed men ringed the square, rifles ready. "Bring her up," Silas commanded. The overseers shoved Amina toward the wooden steps. Her bare feet found each one carefully, refusing to stumble. The rough planks still smelled of fresh-cut pine. A rope hung ready, its end fashioned into a neat noose. The sight of it sent ice through her belly, but she kept her face blank. The crowd pressed closer, eager for the spectacle. Silas raised his hands for silence. "Good people of the county, we gather today for solemn purpose. To see justice done for murdered Christians, and to remind all that rebellion against proper authority cannot stand." His voice carried well, practiced at courthouse speeches. "This slave woman before you committed terrible crimes. Arson, murder, theft, inciting others to violence. She rejected God's ordained order and brought chaos to our peaceful community." Amina wanted to spit at his feet, to scream the truth of their peaceful community. But she held her tongue, scanning the crowd instead. Most faces showed eagerness for blood sport. Some showed pity. A few showed doubt. None showed understanding. The preacher stepped forward. Bible raised. Repent your sins, woman. Confess and beg the Lord's mercy before it's too late. Nothing to confess, Amina said, voice rough from thirst but steady. I acted with clear eyes and clean conscience. Gasps and mutters rippled through the crowd. Proctor's face reddened with rage, but Silas raised a calming hand. Very well, Sheriff, proceed with the sentence. The sheriff moved behind her with the noose. Amina felt the rough hemp brush her neck and forced herself not to flinch. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her eyes forward, fixed on the distant tree line where mist still clung to branches. "Any last words?" the sheriff asked, adjusting the rope. Amina drew breath to speak, and caught a flash of movement in the shadows between trees. A glint of metal, a flutter of cloth. Her pulse quickened with sudden wild hope. "I die free," she declared, loud enough to carry. "Kill this body if you must, but my spirit burned your power to ash. Others will rise. The fire spreads." "Enough!" Proctor stepped forward, face twisted. "Hang the murderess!" A gunshot cracked across the square. Proctor's words turned to a gurgling scream as blood bloomed on his chest. He crumpled, fingers clawing at his ruined cravat. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The crowd, the guards, even the morning air itself. Then war cries shattered the silence as dozens of figures burst from the tree line, weapons raised. The maroon rebels moved like avenging spirits through the morning mist. Rifles blazed, knives flashed, and chaos erupted. The crowd scattered in panic, ladies' skirts trailing in mud as they fled. Guards tried to form a line but fell to precise shots from the trees. Silas reached for his pistol, but never cleared the holster. A thrown axe took him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The sheriff released the noose, fumbling for his weapon, but a bullet found him before he could aim. The preacher fell to his knees, Bible raised like a shield. "God have mercy! God helps those who free themselves," came a familiar voice. Martha emerged from the smoke, gray hair wild around her fierce face. She mounted the gallows steps, with a knife already cutting Amina's bonds. "Samuel!" Amina gasped as the chains fell away. "Safe in the swamp, child. Now move! This ain't over yet." Indeed, more shots rang out as reinforcements arrived from the neighboring farms. The rebels fought with desperate fury, blades and bullets answering whips and chains. Blood soaked into ash-stained earth that had seen too much already. Amina's legs shook as Martha pulled her down the steps, but strength was returning. The morning air tasted like freedom and gunpowder. All around, the world she knew crumbled like the mansion's charred bones, giving way to something new and terrible and necessary. Through the gun smoke and chaos, Amina's eyes locked onto a familiar figure being dragged forward by two rebels. Jonas stumbled between them, hands bound, his fine new clothes torn and muddy. The sight of him sparked something cold and deadly in her chest. "Hold him there!" she commanded, her voice carrying with newfound authority. The rebels forced Jonas to his knees as Amina approached, the iron chains still dangling from her wrists. The fighting had momentarily stilled, survivors and captives gathering to watch. Jonas lifted his chin, trying to maintain dignity despite the fear in his eyes. "You betrayed us," Amina said, each word precise and sharp as broken glass. "Sold us to the bounty hunters for what? Money? Protection? The master's favor?" "I did what was necessary," Jonas replied, but his voice wavered. "Your reckless revenge was going to get us all killed. I had to stop it before—" "Before what?" Amina circled him slowly, the chains swinging. "Before we actually won? Before we proved that slaves could fight back and win?" She addressed the crowd, her voice rising. This man lived among us, ate our food, shared our fires. Then he sold us to the hunters like we were nothing but property to be traded. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Even some of the captured whites looked disgusted at Jonas's betrayal. Martha spat on the ground near his feet. "Please," Jonas begged, dropping his pretense of pride. "I was trying to protect the camp. Your way would have brought death to—" The chains whipped around his throat, cutting off his words. Amina pulled them tight, muscles straining as Jonas thrashed. His eyes bulged, fingers clawing uselessly at the iron links. "Death comes to traitors first," Amina growled in his ear. "You chose their side over ours. Now you die by the same chains they bound us with?" Jonas's struggles weakened, his face turning purple. The crowd watched in tense silence as Amina held firm, showing no mercy. When his body finally went limp, she let him slump to the ground. "Let this be known," she declared, standing over his corpse. "Betrayal will be punished as harshly as slavery itself. We are not property to be sold. We are not animals to be hunted. We are free people fighting for our lives." A cheer went up from the rebels. Even some of the captured slaves from neighboring plantations raised their voices in support. The few remaining white onlookers shrank back, seeing the power shifting before their eyes. But Amina wasn't finished. Her gaze found Silas Whitfield, still bleeding from the axe wound in his shoulder. Two rebels dragged him forward as he struggled weakly. "You and your family built your wealth on our backs," Amina said, approaching him. "Beat us, sold our children, worked us to death in your fields. Now see how it ends." "You'll hang for this," Silas snarled, though fear cracked his voice. "The militia will come. The army. We'll find ashes and bones." Amina cut him off. "Like I left your cousin, Elias." She nodded to the rebels holding him. "Make an example." They understood. Silas screamed as they dragged him toward the square, his fine clothes leaving trails in the mud. Other rebels seized Proctor's body, still leaking blood onto the packed earth. The cousins' corpses were hauled through the square, past the burning ruins of their family mansion. Former slaves they had tormented now spat on their remains. The bodies were left in the dirt as warnings. The mighty brought low, the oppressors broken. "Burn it," Amina ordered, pointing to the gallows. Rebels rushed to splash oil on the fresh wood, others gathering straw and kindling. Within minutes, flames began to climb the structure that had been meant for her death. As the fire grew, Martha appeared through the smoke, leading a group of children. Among them toddled Samuel, his small face lighting up at the sight of his mother. "Mama!" he cried, running to her on unsteady legs. Amina scooped him up, crushing him to her chest. Tears finally broke free as she buried her face in his hair, breathing in his warm, living scent. He squirmed and patted her cheeks, not understanding why she held him so desperately. "My boy," she whispered. "My strong, beautiful boy." She pulled back to study his face, searching for any sign of harm or fear. But he only smiled, secure in his mother's arms. The gallows collapsed in a shower of sparks, adding to the pall of smoke over the square. Former slaves gathered around Amina, looking to her for direction. She saw hope in their faces, and determination, and a fierce joy at their hard-won freedom. "What now?" Martha asked softly, touching Amina's shoulder. Amina shifted Samuel to her hip, straightening her spine. The morning sun broke through the smoke, catching the tears on her cheeks and turning them to gold. Behind her, the flames consumed the last symbol of the Whitfields' power, leaving only ash and memory. "Now we fight," she said, voice carrying to all who gathered close. "Not just for revenge anymore, but for something bigger, for all our children, for their future." The fire I started here will spread, plantation to plantation, until every chain is broken. She looked down at Samuel, peaceful in her arms, unaware that his life had been the spark that lit this blaze. Around them, the rebels began gathering weapons and supplies, preparing for the battles ahead. The morning air tasted of smoke and possibility, of endings and beginnings tangled together like vines in the swamp. The swamp air hung thick and heavy as Amina led the group along hidden paths between cypress trees. Weeks of careful movement had brought them deeper into the wetlands than any plantation patrols dared venture. Samuel's small hand gripped hers tightly as they picked their way across fallen logs and patches of solid ground. "Watch your step here," she called back to the families following behind. "Keep to the markings we left on the trees." The new refuge took shape around them, a collection of raised wooden platforms and thatched shelters nestled among the massive tree trunks. Smoke from cooking fires drifted up through the canopy, dispersing before it could betray their location. Children darted between the structures, their laughter muffled by the constant chorus of birds and insects. Martha approached, wiping sweat from her brow. "The new garden plots are coming along. We found good soil on that rise to the east once we cleared the brush." Amina nodded, scanning the busy scene. Former house slaves worked alongside field hands, sharing knowledge of cultivation and crafts. The skills forced upon them in bondage now served their freedom. "The fish traps are full again," called Jacob, emerging from the water with a dripping basket. "And I found more of those wild onions growing by the creek bend." Samuel tugged at Amina's skirt, pointing to where other children were helping to weave palm fronds into roof thatch. "Me help too, Mama." "Go on, then," she smiled, watching him toddle off to join them. His dark curls caught the filtered sunlight as he concentrated on his clumsy attempts to copy the older children's movements. The camp had grown beyond what she'd imagined possible in those first desperate days after the uprising. Word spread through whispered messages and coded songs, drawing more fugitives to their sanctuary. Each new arrival brought stories of other rebellions, inspired by the burning of the Whitfield mansion. "They're calling it the Summer of Fire now," Martha said softly, following Amina's gaze. 3 more plantations burned last month alone. "The masters are scared, hiding behind locked doors at night." "Good," Amina replied. "Let them know how it feels to live in fear." She moved through the camp, checking the defensive positions they'd established. Sharpened stakes hidden beneath the water. Watch posts high in the trees. Escape routes marked by subtle signs only their people knew how to read. The swamp itself was their strongest protection, its dangers known only to those who had learned its secrets while fleeing through the night. As evening approached, the community gathered around the central fire pit. The flames cast dancing shadows on dark faces that now held pride instead of submission. Children settled into parents' laps, no longer fearing separation by sale. Even the oldest among them sat straighter, as if decades of forced stooping had finally left their bones. Old Joseph, his wool-white hair gleaming in the firelight, began to speak in the rhythmic cadence of a born storyteller. The children leaned forward, though they'd heard these words many times before. "Let me tell you about the woman who burned the master's house," he intoned. "How she rose from the beating post with fire in her heart. How she turned their own greed against them with stolen oil and stolen courage." Amina sat silent, Samuel drowsy against her chest, as Joseph wove the tale. He spoke of the mansion's blaze as if it were an act of nature itself, inevitable as lightning striking a dead tree. The other elders joined in, adding details that grew more magnificent with each telling. "They say the flames danced at her command," Martha's grandmother whispered, "that she walked through the fire untouched, carrying freedom in her arms. The chains melted from her wrists, another voice added, and everywhere her feet touched, the earth remembered and burned again. Samuel stirred, pointing at the fire. "Like that, Mama?" "Big fire?" "Bigger than you can imagine, little one," she murmured, running her fingers through his soft curls. The real memories rose in her mind, the heat on her face, the choking smoke, the screams that still echoed in her dreams. But those details weren't part of the legend being born around this fire. The elders continued, weaving truth and myth together like the palm fronds overhead. They spoke of how the story spread from plantation to plantation, passing from mouth to ear in field whispers and kitchen murmurs, how it gave courage to those who heard it, knowing that one woman's defiance had shattered generations of control. "They hunt for her still," Joseph said, his voice dropping lower, "offering gold for her capture. But the swamp protects its own, and fire answers only to those who understand its power." Amina stared into the flames, remembering how that first spark had felt against the oil-soaked rags. She had been fighting only for Samuel then, thinking no further than their escape. Now her private vengeance had grown into something larger, a flame that caught and spread beyond any one person's story. The children's eyes grew heavy as the tale wound down. Parents carried them off to bed, whispering the legend as a lullaby. Soon only the elders remained, their low voices blending with the night sounds of the swamp. Samuel slept deeply in Amina's arms, his small chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. She knew that when he grew older, he might hear this story without ever knowing his mother lit that first fire. Her name would fade, becoming just another mystery lost in the smoke of history. But she saw how the legend had already taken root in the hearts gathering around this new fire, how it strengthened their resolve and bound them together in shared resistance. The truth of what happened that night lived on in every freed family building a home in this sanctuary, in every child born into freedom instead of bondage. The flames flickered lower as Amina listened to her own story transform into myth. Her silence held both pride and humility. Pride in the courage her act had inspired in others, humility before the larger movement it had helped ignite. The fire would endure in memory and resistance, long after the woman who struck that first spark was forgotten.